Estamos online.
Good afternoon, everybody. I am Maria José Foltran, professor at Federal University of Paraná. We are now going to have a talk by Professor Violeta Demonte titled Variation and Interfaces, a Spanish Modal Evidential at the Syntax-Semantics-Pragmatics Interface. I must start by saying that this event, Abralin ao Vivo, is sponsored and beautifully organized by Abralin in cooperation with other international associations, namely Comité Internacional Permanent de Linguistes, the Associación de Linguística y Filologia de América Latina, the Sociedade Argentina de Estudios Linguísticos, the Sociedade Espanhola de Linguística, the Linguistic Society of America, the Linguistics Association of Great Britain, the Australian Linguistic Societies, and the British Association for Applied Linguistics. You can see that there are a lot of people involved in offering support to this event. Fortunately, the event has also been enjoying a great success, considering the large number of people who have been following its activities. That said, I am now honored and very happy to introduce Professor Violeta Demonte, one of the most distinguished Spanish linguists and a dear friend. Violeta Demonte has done productive research in theoretical linguistics, and she has led many research projects. She is specialized in building groups, leading them with criterion of excellence. Her interests concern, among others, the lexical syntax-semantics interface, the syntax morphology interface, and the syntax-pragmatics interface. I wouldn't have time to mention all her important publications. Besides her many articles, she has been responsible for organizing many books. Among these, the Descriptive Grammar of the Spanish Language, Gramática Descriptiva de la Lengua Española, which she co-directed with Ignacio Bosque, is probably her greatest contribution and also a very important study in the description of Spanish. Besides the pleasure we have to listen to Violeta, I would like to mention that today is her birthday. Happy birthday, Violeta. I wish that you may continue to love life and never stop dreaming. Now, let us all welcome Professor Violeta Demonte. Thank you so much, Violeta, for being with us. Now it is your turn.
Okay. What shall I do now? Just to... do you hear me? Do you see me?
Yes.
Ok. Bueno, empezaré hablando un poquito en castellano para agradecer a Abralin, Asociación Brasileira de Lingüística, el gran honor que me hace al invitarme a esta serie de conferencias tan importante, tan relevante y que muestra la vitalidad, la riqueza y la multiplicidad de la investigación lingüística en este momento. Estoy muy agradecida a mi queridísima amiga y colega María José Foltran por su introducción. Bueno, gracias por la felicitación. No pensaba decirlo, pero me emociona. Por supuesto, agradezco al presidente de Abralin su amabilidad al invitarme y a las asociaciones colaboradoras, tantas, a ver si no me olvido de ninguna, Comité Internacional de Lingüistas, ALFAL, SAE, la Societas Lingüística Europea, la Sociedad Española de Lingüística, LSA, Linguistic Association of Great Britain, Australian Society of Linguistics. Thanks to everybody, and I'm very, very pleased and happy to be here. Okay. The topic of my talk is variation and interfaces, a modal evidential at the syntax-semantics interface, the case of Spanish, Latin American Spanish dizque. I will start.
Sorry, Violeta, are you sharing your screens now?
Sorry?
Do you want to share your screen now?
I want to appear in a minimal picture on the top, so I can see what I'm doing.
Yes. Okay. So let's share your PowerPoint.
What shall I do?
Share your PowerPoint slide the way we did before we start.
What? Now I don't know. I have to go back to the
Zoom. Yeah.
Okay. And now how?
And then compartilha pantalla. The green button.
I don't see it now. I just see the PowerPoint.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Just go back to Zoom, the blue icon. You can like just minimize the PowerPoint slide. Minimize the PowerPoint slide and you see Zoom.
Okay, see. So
and then just like use the mouse and then you're going to see the green button in the middle of and then you select the PowerPoint. Yeah, great.
Now it's okay.
That's fine. You can just go up and open the PowerPoint file. Yeah, it's there.
I have to open it again, I guess.
Okay. Great. Then you can just like put in presentation mode.
Okay, now it's perfect.
It's just go to presentation mode in the bottom.
Okay. Now
great. Yeah, great.
Yeah,
thank you
very much. Thank you very much. As I have just said, I will start with a certain milestone. From Boas' statement that languages could differ in many ways and without limit in infinite and unpredictable ways, to the present view that inter and intralinguistic variation is a core property of languages, probably linked to many factors, one of them language faculty itself. There is a long journey which I do not intend to walk alone here. In my view, and of course I will leave in many things outside, there are 4 milestones approach to linguistic variation in the 20th century, starting in the 19th century in many cases. The first one is dialectology, the study of regional speech variation, later on becoming geolinguistics. A second big stop is social linguistics, which following the great lecture at this forum by William Labov, I will characterize as linguistic variation or change control by independent variables in the case of Labov, by social variables, social evaluation of linguistic variants. Third step, in my view, is linguistic typology, a discipline which identifies both how languages vary and what they all have in common. Here you have the distribution of the affixation and prefixation and suffixation in many languages. Nowadays, linguistic typology aims at establishing universals based on tendencies observed through the documentation of multiple languages. On the contrary, not on the contrary, but in a different way, Chomsky's universals are rooted in supposed internal properties of the language faculty. The view that will interest me in this topic is formal linguistic variation. According to this approach, variation would be rooted first to universal principles and syntactic parameters, which determine linguistic variability amongst languages. It is rooted also to morphosyntactic and phonetic microparameters, which in a way retake in a very different way dialectal variation. And in a third and more recent and still unexplored view, variation is rooted to external cognitive systems interfacing with syntax in interaction with so-called third factor elements like computational efficiency, general cognitive and processing mechanisms. Just as a side note to remind, classical dialectology links linguistics to geographical variation and atlas elaboration. With sociolinguistics, linguistics became a social science deeply informed by statistical and quantitative methodologies. Typology binds to genealogy and evolution of languages, and with formal linguistics, this science becomes part of cognitive science in at least two senses: a study of formal computational principles of learnability and a study of the conceptual and inferential systems which rule lexical, semantic, and pragmatic interpretation. To a certain extent, these four views could complement each other in certain cases. And in a way, this is the vision I will adopt in the second part of my talk. In the first part, I will briefly present the main ideas leading the research on variation in formal linguistics and the types of variation that can be identified using this approach. In the second part, which is a case study, I will explore syntactic semantic variation in Spanish and as well cross-linguistically. I will explore semantic variation in evidentials, taking the modal evidential dizque in my view as a case study. Let's go to language variation in formal linguistics, starting, so to say, from the beginning. Within the generative paradigm, variation is and has been linked to the notion of parameter, to the distinction between macro, micro parameters, and more recently to the idea that there are many loci for variation, which can be identified, as we will see, under the twofold notion of interface, independent levels which impose conditions on narrow syntax. Here you have some, let's say, important references in the topic of variation of parameters. The first idea was that universal grammar, it's starting in Chomsky 1981, is endowed with a set of broad grammatical principles common to all languages, along which languages can vary taking binary options. Languages can set these principles on or off. For a principle like all sentences might have subjects, languages, for instance, may choose to express or not to express the subject, and this is the null subject parameter. For a head, may choose for a head of a phrase to precede or follow its complement, this is the head parameter, or to front or non-to front WH element, this is WH parameter. It is said that a series of properties organized as clusters associate to the selected option, and these properties are defined. For instance, just rapidly, the null subject parameter considers that there is a distinction between languages which do not need to express the subject, proto languages like Spanish, encontrado el libro, versus English, have found is ungrammatical. The languages we do have and do not have free inversion, ha comido Juan, has eaten John, is ungrammatical, or cannot have null expletive subjects, like in English you cannot avoid it, while in Spanish you can say tarde. The notion of a macroparametric variation was and still is widely used as well as criticized. It is not now quite clear that the idea of macroparametric variation has many problems. Namely, there are no languages satisfying all the list of associated property. Moreover, and more important, this notion is not compatible with the vision of a minimal universal grammar in which principal proliferation is not expected. This vision of macroparameters is being refined and revised at this moment, and macroparameterization is seen in terms of parameter hierarchy, like in the important work of Ian Robert and his collaborators. A big shift, this is another step, regarding the notion, the properties, and the locus of linguistic variation took place with the emergence of the so-named Minimalist program. The main idea of this program is that the core computational system, syntax or narrow syntax, is made of three simple operations: merge, formation of binary minimal structures, move, internal merge, the introduction of an element in another position in the hierarchical representation, and transfers or spell out. Another central idea of this program is that language is designed to efficiently meet the condition of the conceptual intentional interface, let's say this system of thought, and of the articulatory perceptual interface, let's say phonetic execution of the abstract form. And also it is important to note that the output of syntactic computation must satisfy legibility requirements at both interfaces. Simply said, we can say that sentence should be interpreted and form should be spelled out, that is, pronounced in a linear sequence, even though the syntactic structures are supposedly hierarchical, obey binary principle, are recursive, etc. This is a diagram representing this idea. Very schematically. Let's go to another important notion within this view, which is the notion of interfaces, which is important to understand interfaces at this moment. To better understand this idea, let me remind you here that under this view, syntax is very restricted. And what we say and understand, and the options we have to express a given thought, come from its interfacing with other systems. This is a hypothesis. But what is an interface? There are two senses of interface in linguistics, one more general and one more technical or formal. I will briefly deal with the first approach, with first view or vision, and I will later more explicit about the technical present view of interfaces. You can think of interfaces as interactions between modules within a modular vision of the linguistic system, like in LGB. Interface is seen as the interaction or communication between putative modules. Interfaces in this wide sense, or study of interfaces in this wide sense, bring interesting theoretical debates and improve and qualify the view of syntax as the key component. But this debate do not necessarily relate to variation. For instance, I will just give some examples of how productive this vision of interactions between modules was. There were a lot of studies about the lexicon syntax interface on which I worked during a long period. The debate here is related to the question of whether or not the lexicon constitutes a distinct module with specific operations and primitive. Within this debate, lexical meaning confronts the lexicalist hypothesis versus the projectionist hypothesis. In the lexicalist view, the predicates, which stay in a separate module, give rise, for instance, for some people like Levin and Rappaport or Jackendorf, to lexical conceptual structure, which primitives like act, cause, and in a way, a derivation of generative semantics, And correspondence rules or variables associate this structure to syntactic positions, so deriving the syntactic argument structure. In the projectionist view, predicates are formed within the syntactic component through regular syntactic operation, like merge and move, like in the works especially by Borer and Ramsham. That you have here a tree where you have initiator, undergoer, resultee, basic semantic concepts introduced as grammatical categories in a pre-syntax, let's say, module, so to say. Another important area of research was morphology syntax interface, which raised many debates about the boundaries. Are morphological elements syntactic elements? This is a very, let's say, central hypothesis within generative grammar, starting from the fact that inflection is considered as a syntactic head, the head of a sentence, which is in another is a traditional view. A second line of research comes from the study of syntax morphology interface, which advances the hypothesis that words are assembled by rules of syntax. This is a very old view. Also, you have Chomsky's regard on nominalization, and here you have a formation of a derived nominal. So there are no distinction between sentences and words. They are both treated as the output of the same generative system, the syntax. And at the present moment, there are other important views, which I will not talk about them, like distributive morphology, very important area. There have been studies on the Syntax-Pragmatics interface. To start, we have to say that pragmatics, namely intentions, implicatures, desires, social distance, is not included in the language faculty, since these aspects of linguistic structure are context-dependent. However, questions like information structure, topic-focused information, also very much related to phonology prosody syntax interface, provide interesting cases of variation. On the other hand, elements of the speech act have been seen as closely related to syntactic structure since the Praga school, or even within functional grammar. Some peripheral elements have also incorporated into syntactic analysis, like in the proposal by Spisanteni, Ottenian Spis, about the speech act phrase. Syntax-semantics interface, on which I will talk more right now, was during a long period centered on the relation between syntax and LF, on which I believe Howard Lasnik was talking yesterday. Well, here you have, this is what follows. Here you have what could be a scheme of the idea of variation in the minimalist program. You have a syntactic component with certain outputs, and it is proposed, and these are the lines of research. Many things are very programmatic, that we have micro variation, and as to the checking of functional features. You have variation due to the interface with the perceptual articulatory system, and the main concepts are linearization and externalization. And you have variation coming from the interface with the conceptual intentional system. Well, a first step, which was the one on the top in the previous representation, the minimalist program led linguists to propose a set of microparameters. It is minimal points of variation related either to the functional lexicon, where by functional lexicon I understand determiners, stems, complementizers, aspect, mood, etc. And they are, it is related to grammatical properties covered by the externalization hypothesis, according to which parameters reduce to realization options, namely PF decisions, on need to externalize a structure constructed by an underspecified syntactic component. This is important, for instance, within distributive morphology. Given this, let's say, a strict framework, we expect to find not very many types of microvariation. Actually, we find three types of the first one is, as I was saying in the scheme, is morphosyntactic variation. Parametric variation is restricted to the functional lexicon and to the narrow categories of morphological elements. This was said by Chomsky. Microparametric variation is considered also as comparative work done among closely related languages or varieties of a language with similar properties. So from macroparameters to microvariation, there is a big space where we go now to a kind of new comparative syntax. The microparametric approach focuses on small differences between related languages and dialects, and these localized points are typically tied to particular constructions, and they may even involve a single lexical unit. Here, I have there are many phenomena which have been studied under this vision of micro-morphosyntactic variation as different or morphological or category realization for the one same meaning. And all these variation is related to features. For instance, the fact of leísmo in Spanish, you can say le vi or lo vi, is related to the feature person. Verb movement in interrogatives is related to the feature WH. Negation, split negation that you find in French and Catalan is related to prosody and lexical features. Doubling, the Rioplatense phenomenon, Juan la saludó a María, which is exchange in peninsular Spanish, where you have to say la saludó, is also in a complex explanation given in a recent work, is licensing focus position, but with certain features which trigger a movement, etc., etc. I don't have time to go through all the examples. Well, the phonology syntax interface in the view within the generative syntax, the generative program, minimalist program, excuse me, discusses, it is, I'm not very familiar with this part of the program, let's say, it discusses how syntactic objects are mapped to the sensory motor systems. And important concepts are the theory of labeling, how you recognize constituency, the theory of prosodic domains, for the studies on or the claims about phonological phrases, etc. It is said also, and this is very new, although it's very much unexplored until recently, in this interface, in this type of variation as a result of the phonology syntax interface, there are what Chomsky 205 called third factor principles, like general principles of data analysis, minimal search, efficient computation, economy, which are present when variation takes place. The question of linear order has also become central in the proposal about this interface, and since, let's say, word order is not considered as syntactic, but as alignment of prosodic and syntactic constituents, like in the work by Cinque or in many works. Well, what about semantic-syntactic variation, or the interface with the conceptual intensional system? By default, we could assume that there cannot be variation at the level of this module, because the structures derived by the syntactic system and the conceptual intensional system cannot be, let's say, unifies, since it cannot have differences since mind is identical in all humans. However, what is required in the minimalist program is that syntactic structures be legible by the conceptual intensional system. Therefore, the fundamental question about the relationship between syntax and semantics is not only whether semantic properties enter into syntax, which is the case, but in the case of topic, focus, etc., but rather how the independently motivated syntactic devices like merge or a structure of the faces, etc., device are put into use for semantic purposes. I hypothesize that we have semantic variation if one grammatical category belongs to different semantic denotations, types, or contents. Since syntax should be a perfect solution for the interaction with the semantic intensional system, we can expect also, this is a second way of seeing semantic syntactic variation, we can expect a certain limited isomorphism to occur. And the third case, in my view, which is the one I will explore, is that one single constituent can interact with different levels of a sentence, giving rise to syntactic semantic variation. This is will be my proposal regarding Spanish evidential dizque. Well, I don't have time, I suppose, to go very much about this question, but following a chronological path, a classical example of semantic macroparameter is Kierkegaard's nominal mapping parameter, according to which languages can vary. This is a macroparameter with regard to the predicative or argumental nature of the nouns. When nouns are predicates, as he proposes it is the case in Romance, when they appear in argumental position, they should combine with determiners to become arguments. That's why we cannot say in given positions perro ladra, and we have to say el perro ladra, which is the element which gives reference to the predicate. In languages like Chinese, nouns are names of kinds. This is Kierkegaard's hypothesis, and can thus function as arguments on their own. This would be the reason why Chinese nouns do not take determiner. There are other examples, like the work by Frances and Kunz-Garboden about property concept sentence, but I will not pursue this example. As to the other hypothesis, the other way of interfacing between syntax and the conceptual intentional principle, I say that, and it is also proposed by Spenonius, that a certain isomorphism could occur, and we can use syntactic semantic the basis for semantic purposes. The relevant question for the hypothesis of this interface is what supposedly are semantic or pragmatic elements are explicit in the syntax. One example comes from Baker, who studies the Magahi language, which take different particles to signal how the speaker highlights the hearer or the addressee participant in the speech act. For instance, when you have an unspecific hearer, you use the suffix "e." When you have a friend, a non-honorific person, you use "au," and you use "it" when the hearer is the grandfather. So Baker postulates an allocutive agreement. So he uses syntactic devices to explain, let's say, pragmatic facts like treatment in languages, and he postulates an addressee agreement. So one element of the speech act becomes a functional category, so the legibility of syntactic structures increases. Well, what I have said that one constituent can interact with different levels of a sentence, giving rise to variation. For example, variation could rely on the different semantic nature of one and the same particle, as is the case in the so-called dichotomy view of evidentials. We can have an evidential which is an epistemic modal. In a vast, we have an evidential, I will propose, that can be described as an epistemic modal in a vast area of Spanish, whereas in some varieties, the same element appears to be an illocutionary marker or simply a quotative marker. We will see a constituent now which modifies different levels of the sentence and expresses different attitudes, modality, perspective, knowledge of the speaker within the speech act. So let's make a shift and go to the second part, a case of semantic-syntactic pragmatic variation, the case of dizque. Well, here you have two examples of sentences in which this particle is used. Agregué un comentario plagado de malevolencia, dizque aprende álgebra y literatura al mismo tiempo. As you may see, I translate these formas supposedly. While in dizque muchos colombianos no saben qué son los colombialismos, qué opinan, I translated dizque as reportedly. I will come back to this. I just now want to note that there are a lot of studies about this particle, and as I understand, very many about Brazilian Portuguese. And dizque, there are many studies about, let's say, the areas where this particle is used. You have the references there. There are studies about the evolution from dizque to dizque as a case of grammaticalization, which is the most extended view, or other people think that it could be lexicalization. And also there are many proposals about the function of dizque: discourse marker, evidentiality strategy, pragmatic marker, overtone with an implicature of doubt. And in a recent work, San Roman proposes a continuum of subjectivization from reportative values to totally epistemic values. Well, so this is the summary of what I just said. We have very many analyses, and we will consider, because this, this is joint work with my colleague, Dr. Olga Fernández-Soriano. We consider dizque as a grammatical evidential. The main hypothesis of this paper, of this presentation, is that American Spanish dizque gives place to semantic variation cross-dialectally. It involves three syntactic semantic values which correspond to different types or contents, different types of assertion: illocutionary, modal, or quotative. These types, that this is the claim, correlate with syntactic position in the speech act phrase area. Namely, we have a pure reportative evidential, so it is said, the less extended use, an epistemic modal evidential with a presupposition of reportativity, which is the most extended use, and a quotative evidential found in language contact areas, according to certain authors, mainly Alberts and Travis. The specific contribution of this research is that we delimit the semantics of this can come up to this classification using semantic tests that distinguish epistemic modal evidential from illocutionary indirect evidential operators, as well as other semantic tests. So this is semantic view or semantic treatment, semantic pragmatic treatment of evidential. I want to say, just as a side note, that in the literature on this dizque, Latin American Spanish dizque, there has been two main approaches to the relation between evidentiality and epistemic modal. Some people say, like Moran Maldonado 2015 interesting work, that they are different categories: reportative on the one hand and modals, like a modal adverb, more or less. And I would say that most of the people claim that there are no clear boundaries between them, and some people say that there are degrees, or as I've said a minute ago, San Roman claims that they express degrees of subjectivization. In this research, we try to solve this dilemma by using the semantic pragmatic analysis for reportative evidential and a formal semantic presuppositional analysis for epistemic modal evidential dizque. But let's start from the beginning. What is an evidential? Evidentials grammatically mark the speaker's source of information for the proposition. In most languages, like in Bulgaria, Bulgarian, evidentials are affixes or clitics, like in Cheyenne or Quechua, statimshes, etc. In Japanese, evidentials are independent words appearing at the end of the sentence. This is an example from Quechua. You have a system of three evidentials, mi, si, and cha, where mi is a direct evidential. So if you see mi, it is raining in Quechua, you are saying that I have sensorial experience to say that. If you see si and the proposition, you claim, you assert that you were told that something happens. And cha means I inferred, mainly from physical evidence. This is what father says, that something happens. So that's why there are, this is the classical table, direct and indirect evidential, attested, infer, and reportative. We propose a twofold view of dizque as an indirect reportative evidential, a weakened reportative, as an epistemic modal evidential with the presupposition of reportativity. Well, before going to the analysis, I want to say that among the semantic pragmatic literature, there are three views on evidentiality. Some people like Eichenball, which is a classic on this topic, say that evidentials are, it's a full-fledged category and gives rise to closed paradigms languages. The rest are evidentiality strategies. You have an agnostic or disaggregated view, according to which cross-linguistic differences among evidentials should be attributed to external factors. So this is not a grammatical category, but a manifestation of perspectival information, means to express other types of meaning. In this frame, evidentiality is not a primitive of the grammar. And in the dichotomy view, evidentials divide into two semantic classes, which can be found cross-linguistically, but also within the same language. Modal evidentials, which operate at the level of proposition. This is important to understand the question, and they have a meaning of epistemic modality. And there is a presupposition which ensures that they are indirect, there are indirect evidence for P. While illocutionary evidentials operate at the speech act level. And so if you have this distinction, variation in evidentiality can be parameterized using this underlying semantic distinction. In what follows, if I have time, I will explain briefly the basic syntactic properties and give examples. In the section 4, I will study the semantics of dizques through the standard test that distinguish epistemic modal evidentials from illocutionary indirect evidential operators, and through other related semantic tests like embeddability, modal shiftability. I will center the discussion at proving that dizque is an epistemic modal. At the end, a case of quotative dizque used in Ecuadorian Spanish will be presented, which may be characterized, as far as I can tell, or we can tell, as a marker. Well, dizque is a morphologically invariable word similar to adverbs, conjunctions, so-called particles. The main property, there is one sentential dizque whose main property is that it scopes over a proposition either finite or non-finite. Dizque muchos colombianos no saben qué son los colombialismos, ¿qué opinas? Or Andrés, a finite sentence, Andrés no volvió a tocarme, dizque final infinitival sentence para no lastimar al niño. This dizque may occupy different internal positions. We have a careful analysis of this question, always having sentential scope, and you can have deletion, and so it behaves like an operator rather than a modifier. And there is another dizque, which I will not consider here, that we name the constituent modifier dizque. Don Tomás Gómez, el prole, dizque literato, o en el de Morelia los niños preferían lo sabroso a lo dizque nutritivo. This dizque doesn't involve at all source of information, so technically it cannot be assigned an evidential value. So there are other properties which make a difference between this dizque and sentential modifier dizque, which is the one on which I will focus. Well, as I've said, this is a repetition, and we distinguish a reportative evidential, epistemic modal evidential, and a quotative marker. And I have not presented example of this in a sentence like, which is from Travis. Angela dice, pero ¿qué te dicen? Santi answers, uy, doña Carmen quiere bastante a Jaime. This is literally what doña Carmen, Santi has heard said to Doña Carmen, or whatever, any person. Evidentials. I will go now to the modal evidential analysis, to the analysis of dizque as an epistemic modal evidential. I've anticipated that evidential is split into two categories. One of them is the modal analysis, where the indirect evidential is a universal epistemic modal, and as such, it involves the probability of a proposition. This is a more formal semantic definition with respect to a common ground, and presupposes that this has been acquired through second-hand information. So the interpretation of evidential P as an evidential operator implies an assertion in view of the speaker's knowledge, and a presupposition the speaker has indirect evidence for P. While when you have an evidential which is an illocutionary operators interact with the speech act structures. They specify no modality, not at all, illocutionary force like assertion or presentation. It is said that they modify the sincerity conditions of the speech act. They do not have truth value. In the case of reportative evidential, the relevant sincerity condition is that someone different from the speaker has claimed P. Well, based on many people, Sporsky, Faller, Matthewson, I will examine the semantics of dizque through different tests in order to determine if it is an evidential modal, an epistemic modal, or an illocutionary operator. I will consider 4 tests as the challengeabilities. You can define the proposition scope by a modal, because you cannot challenge, while with illocutionary operator there are no problems. A modal sentence, a sentence under an evidential modal evidential can be embedded. An illocutionary operator, the one with an illocutionary operator cannot, although I must say that there are many counterexamples, many languages in which it happens. So it's these tests are weak in some senses. An interrogative can scope over an illocutionary operator when it cannot scope over a modal. An important test is that one which proves whether the P, the proposition, is false or it is known to be false. It is not expected that P's or prepositions embedded under modal be false. While with illocutionary operator, this is very different. Well, I also will make reference to other tests proposed by many people, but especially Korotkova, like shifting in attitude predicate, shifting to the addressee, and I don't have, unfortunately, time to explain more of these questions. Well, just to give a flash, for pure reportative evidentials, the main properties are that they appear preferably sentenced initially and in autonomous sentences. The content provided by an illocutionary operator cannot be questioned, since an illocutionary operator doesn't affect the truth value of the sentence. This is the challengeability. So if in certain areas of Spanish, this is the case. In this context, P can be true or false. We can say dizque, there is, let's say it's irrelevant that you challenge. Juan se fue, we can, dizque Juan se fue, the follow-up can be, no está su coche, pero lo estoy viendo en su coche. On the other hand, the illocutionary operators cannot be cancelled. Namely, you cannot say dizque reportedly la pandemia se ha acabado en Corea del Sur, and you cannot cancel the report that if you say, pero no han dicho nada as a follow-up. Let's go now to these tests to evaluate whether dizque is in some cases an epistemic modal. This is, as for the test one, challengeability, a modal claim that contributes possibility or necessity can be questioned, doubted, or disagreed with, since it forms part of the propositional content, contrary to the previous case in which it doesn't make part of the propositional content, but it is related to the speech act. So, in 21, no le permitían a uno mirar hacia los lados, dice que había cosas que uno debía ver. Jamás de los jamases recuerdo haber visto nada. The speaker claims that supposedly there were things that one should not see. Yet she rejects the contribution of the modal proposition and asks for the hearer view. Thus, dizque is a truth conditional operator. If it contributes to the propositional content, it contributes to truth conditions according to certain views of modality. If dizque were considered an illocutionary operator, this sequence should not be possible in the same way. I will keep this. Embeddability. An illocutionary operator cannot be embedded since they modify the speech act, but an element that contributes to the proposition expressed should be able to be embedded. As I've said, there are counterexamples for the first part of this assertion. Well, I just want to say that dizque epistemic modal dizque appears to be the case of we have to go through this much more, appears to be a case of syntactically and semantically embedded evidentials. In this sentence, pues andaba usted patroncito, dice Cándido Cuellar, subí a buscarlo a su despacho y me dijeron que dizque. So it is embedded, it is in subordinate sentences, and it is the embedded subject that reports someone's at P, but dizque is anchored to the verb of saying. So the subject of the main clause has heard P. In cases like this, evidentials are shifted to the main subject. Similarly, so what these tests tend to say is that they are similar to epistemic modal in English in clausal complements of attitude predicates. Regarding embedding under certain types of predicates, dizque can be embedded under semi-factive, like es molesto que dizque tomen los precios, under an attitudinal predicate, such as think, por eso la gente piensa que dizque uno fue rico, or under a belief operator, si creía que dizque lo iba a lanzar a la estratosfera de la aceptación, etc. So I just want to note that there are three classes of attitude predicates that lies in epistemicity. And the representational attitudes are those which license epistemic modal in their complement. And these are exactly the class of predicates that we have found in our examples come from corpora, say verbs, semi-factives, and prepositional, attitude predicates. Coming to the other test, dizque can appear in interrogatives. Illocutionary operators cannot. Dizque soy su mejor amigo y no me cuenta que ya tiene una novia. What happens in this case is that, opposed to declarative, where the evidential perspective is normally anchored on the speaker, so it is the speaker who have heard something or suppose something. In interrogatives evidentials can flip to the hearer's evidential perspective. Namely, an interrogative with an evidential asks about what the hearer knows. It's similar in this sense to rhetorical questions. Well, we've found very common examples in uses of dizque y no dizque ibas a ir a la embajada. As I've said, no dizque lo habían eliminado, as opposed to declarative, where the evidential perspective is anchored on the speaker. In interrogatives, evidentials can flip to the hearer's evidential perspective. An interrogative with an evidential asks about what the hearer knows. We think that in these cases, although the answer is expected to be positive, like in rhetorical question, in this case, dizque is a weakened modal, since the speaker, when you have no dizque, asks for confirmation and responsibility. The hearer is asked to confirm his commitment to P. Well, finally, the test of falsity. Generally, a sentence with dizque cannot be felicitous if P is known to be false, since epistemic modals contribute possibility. Well, as I've said in the first example of the types of evidentials which are illocutionary operators are compatible with the situation and with the speaker thinks either that the proposition is true or thinks that P is false. The speaker is actually agnostic as to the truth of the proposition. With epistemic modal, the situation is not conceivable, since the speaker is asserted that the proposition is possibly or necessarily true. However, in many languages, indirect evidentials can be used when the prejacent is false, like in Quechua, like in statin shed, etc. We claim that the behavior of dizque, where it is very common, and some people say that this is the most normal interpretation of the sentence under the scope of dizque, is that what the speaker is saying is false, and he knows it is false. So you have examples here, like los farabundos están bien escondidos, entran en los pueblos, sacan a los hombres que se quedan, dizque los interrogan, pero los torturan, los matan y los desaparecen. The speaker knows that the proposition they are interrogated is false, and since it is followed by an adversative clause, which asks that they are actually tortured and killed. Well, without going into detail, Smirnova, study in Bulgarian, has claimed that what happens is that evidentials can express, indirect evidential can express the dicto report. So the proposition is evaluated with respect to the epistemic modal base relativized to the reporter, not to the speaker, which is the normal, let's say, shifting or the normal anchoring of evidentials. Well, unfortunately, I don't have time, but this is the syntactic representation that we propose for the two readings of the indirect reportative evidential, the stride, where the speaker is linked to the perceiver, and the dicto, where is the evaluator who share features with the witness and who share knowledge with the witness and with the perceiver. Well, the third type of dizque I have found is the quotative dizque. 41 is the example I read before. According to Alberts, dizque in Ecuadorian Spanish, this is another case. So you have this quotative dizque in Medellin, Colombia, and you have dizque in Ecuadorian Spanish in a bilingual context, where it appears in the immediate context of direct discourse. How does Alberts describe the use? He has shown that this lexical unit is very frequent in Ecuadorian Spanish in bilingual areas. And it usually goes with together with a say verb, dizque pregunta, dizque dice, what what is said before or after is a quote. Si no me perdonas, mátame, que quiero morir en tus manos, dizque dice. So it combines with communication verbs and mainly with the verb say, decir. And this is a counting of cases of dizques in narratives, in other types of text. So what Olbers observes is that in all these cases, dizque plus decir appears in the context of direct discourse. And he thinks that the el uso redundante de dizque is an innovation of Andean Spanish. Well, in these areas, in uses similar to the just mentioned ones, dizque is not an epistemic modal with the presupposition of reportativity. Its characterization as reportative evidential is also dubious. It appears just to mark that a quotation is introduced. Quotative reading signals that an evidential takes a speech act as its arguments. In the minimal syntax of this constituents, it introduces direct discourse. It appears in initial position preceding the verb decir or at the end of the quote, or as a parenthetical, like in the examples in 47. Olbers says that he hasn't found any, or she hasn't found, excuse me, that quotative dizque cannot be a PR, or she didn't find any example of Quechua preceded by negation. Well, so I have found 3 dizques, reportative dizque, which is in our syntactic analysis, is in the top area of the speech act area. In the case of evidential modal dizque, the speaker is anchored to the perceiver or to the witness, and it can be embedded. That is what I have tried to show. And quotative dizque is a discourse particle, perhaps external to the syntactic area. So 3 syntactic positions and 3 semantic pragmatic values. So I have applied tests and I have found these 3 cases, and I hope to have illustrated the case of semantic variation within Spanish dialects. Muito obrigada, muchas gracias, thank you very much. What shall I do?
Thank you, Violeta. Okay, thank you very much for your talk. And I will address some questions made by the audience. The first one we have here, it's a question from Thais Deschamps. Can you talk a little bit more about what kind of pragmatic properties are part of the linguistic faculty?
Okay, this is a difficult question, but if you think, for instance, that you have means to express subjectivity, I suppose this is a pragmatic element, or the actors of the speech act can be understood in pragmatic terms. So you have certain what perhaps and also intentions, desires. I mean, if you think of something like the distinction between syntactic categories and strategies, you use certain syntactic categories or certain syntactic constructions like tense or like questions to have implicatures. So this would be, let's say, if you have a syntactic analysis, you can predict implicatures or intentions based on the syntactic semantic means that you are using. So it depends on I understand that the series of pragmatic elements is very long, but I think it's not very complicated to think that some of them either are implicatures of given a specific syntactic construction. So this is the interface of the syntax with the conceptual intensional system, or you can have them introduced as part of the syntactic structures, like in case you think that the way you treat the treatments you use for a given person is pragmatic. So the case of Magahi, studied by Becker, is a case of grammatical introduction of a pragmatic element. This is the answer I can think of.
Okay. Another question from Ligia Negri. Do you believe that there is a basic interpretation or function underlying the several hypotheses or explanations for dizque?
Could you repeat?
Do you believe that there is a basic interpretation or function underlying the several hypotheses or explanations for dizque?
Yeah, okay. A meaning interpretation, yes, the reportative interpretation. So that's our presupposition, because you can think, in fact, that we have three different elements, and our claim is that that for this reason we have tried to see what happens with the modal, with epistemic modal value, because the basic definition of epistemic modality is that even if you express strongly doubt or uncertainty, you can, this is also the analysis that Kratzer proposes for modals in general. When you use a modal, it is because there is, let's say, doubt or something, excuse me, you have heard, you have mainly somebody has said that, or somebody, or everybody, or whatever. But the reportative meaning, yeah, this is a very good question, because I didn't say that, is the main element of the three analyses. ¿Qué pasó?
Okay. Another question is from Janaína Carvalho. Can you combine the evidential dizque with the epistemic modal poder, generating something like dizque plus possibility plus rain? Dizque pode chover. If yes, wouldn't it be counter evidence to the idea that dizque is epistemic, assuming that languages usually do not convey two similar modal values in the sentence?
Okay, yeah, that's a point. And what we have to check is whether in this case we are in front of a reportative evidential. So that the meaning is simply somebody had said a possibility. So what we have found is that what you can't do is, mostly, we haven't found examples, combine dizque with modal adverbs, with epistemic adverbs. Dizque posiblemente. This is not found, or not very much found, or not found, I would say, because I don't remember the data now. But if you have dizque puede, which is very possible, I think, although I'm not a native speaker of dizque, well, I have an escape, let's say. This dizque is not a modal, is because the modal is expressed by the modal verb, except that you have another modal interpretation, in this case, not epistemic, but I don't think this is the case. And you have a reportative, a pure reportative, and a modal, since you have the two possibilities in Spanish. So we have to check, we have to ask informants and to see what is the possibility. But this is, if we claim that this is an epistemic modal. This is a counterexample. Yeah, but we don't claim this. Very good question.
Another question from Flavia Irata Valle. Are there any prosodic differences between the three dizque?
Yeah, I don't know. Simply, I don't know. In the literature, there are references to the I don't know, because we haven't explored this. We haven't, because this is a matter of experiments. But I remember that Olbers, I believe, says that when you have dizque in the final position, that you can have these examples, which is a case problematic to analyze for us. You say, va a llover, dizque. In this case, clearly there is a pause. So there are, when you have, I would say, in certain positions, you have a different prosody, you have a different pronunciation. I think it is expected to have different pronunciations, different prosody, excuse me, for each case. So this is something that needs to be checked. Yeah. That's what we predict with qualification or whatever you want, but this is what we should predict if the analysis is on the right track.
Yes. And another question from Francisco José Fernández Rubiera. Do you think the origin of this evidential marker could be related to the selection of this predicate, as you indicated with Olga in 209, whereby K could be force or fin? Would you like to?
You mean
to repeat?
Paco Fernández Rubiera. Hola, Paco.
Sí.
He asked whether, what is the example? That you have K and dizque. I didn't follow quite well the question. What is exactly the question?
The question, I repeat it. Do you think the origin of this evidential marker could be related to the selection of this predicate, as you indicated with Olga in 209, whereby K could be force or fin?
Okay, now I understand. Yeah, it's a sophisticated question. Yeah, of course, this comes from the fusion, as in all grammatical process and grammaticalization processes, of the verb dizque, the tsir, plus ke, because, and this is selection. You have these select subordinate sentences, complement sentences, and you start using this to say, María dice que llueve, and at a given moment, this has been very much studied. We, Fernández-Soriano and I, we have a work explaining this type of grammaticalization in terms of Robert's hypothesis. And now, yeah, the question is whether this K, which fusions with combines and the meaning disappears, it is not anymore a complementizer, and it is not anymore a verb. It's this. Where this K of dizque come from? I would say that from the finite phrase, since there has to be a weak connection, a weak boundary between the selecting verb and the subordinate sentences such that these combinations occur. But this is an occurrence, I don't know. But it is the most plausible hypothesis. If it were forced, perhaps the blurring of the limits between the two words to make a new word without the meaning, that meaning becoming a marker or whatever, is not expected. I hope Paco will coincide.
Yeah. Now we have a general question. How does the study of the lexical syntax-semantics interface can contribute to secondary education? It is a question from...
Yeah, it's an important question, yeah.
Andreissa Selvati.
You know, I have a strong commitment to secondary education. And although I'm not an expert and I have given some talks, but always more or less based on general ideas, some people claim that there is an important group, the Grok group in Barcelona, led by Ángel Gallego, and where Ignacio is also working. They are very much insisting on the importance of teaching grammar, and I think that's important, mainly in secondary school. Because grammar allows to the teaching of grammar in the sense in which it is conceived in certain frames. Either if you have construction grammar, or if you have formal grammar, or if you have functional, but there is a certain, the notion of architecture of languages is that things, you know, there is no an arbitrary selection of elements to make a sentence. I think this is important, but I myself think that given, you know, what people call the poverty of vocabulary and the lack of capacity, ability to write and to use a variety of words and to know. I think that, for instance, lexical semantics and is very important. I would teaching the lexicon all the time, and of course, the lexical selection is one part of introducing or teaching lexical semantics and building capacities to build vocabularies and to go to sentences in a different way. Yeah, it's important.
Okay, now I have a question. You are familiar with Portuguese. You could say we have the 3 dizque in Portuguese.
You are
you are familiar with Brazilian Portuguese?
More or less, yeah.
Could you say that we have the 3 dizque or no?
I don't know, but the last work by San Roman, the one I mentioned, which was published in Lingua, studied, it's the first, and she says that this is, let's say, blame on the researchers, that there has not been comparative research among dialects of Romance languages or dialects. And she studies Brazilian Portuguese, and she says that for the case of Brazilian Portuguese, there are very, very few works. And she mentions González Galvão, puede ser, and another work. I recommend this because, and she thinks that the most extended use is, I think she would claim, San Roman, that you have at least 2. The modal and the, yeah, for sure, yeah. This is, and she claims this. I don't know the quotative because I would have, but I think she says something about quotatives. Yes, I think you have, but what San Roman says, contrary to what happens in Spanish, is that you have, while in Spanish cross dialectally, you have the modal use is prevalent. In Brazilian Portuguese, she says that the prevalent use is reportative. That's what she claims. It's something interesting to be studied, yeah.
Yeah, it seems for me too. I believe that's it. I would like to thank the audience for participating and the technical staff as well, to Abralin once again. And I would also like to reinforce here the importance of joining Abralin ao vivo to strengthen our field. Please continue following the event and help spread the series Abralin ao vivo. Thank you so much, Violeta, once again, for this beautiful talk. Have a wonderful, happy, healthy birthday and the many more to come. Okay?
Maria Jose, it has been a big pleasure to have been led by you in this occasion. I'm very happy to see you, and I would like to have the possibility to abrazar you personally. Thank you, the audience, and thank you to Abralin for this, as I said at the beginning, fantastic initiative. And I hope and I wish that events like this, which means what they mean, that Brazil is a powerful country from the scientific view, and in many senses, that this country will come back to the position he deserves in the world. And I hope the pandemic would end as soon as possible. Thank you very much to all of you, and ciao, Maria Jose.
Ciao, Violeta. Ciao.